My parents favored my twin sister so much that they spent my wedding fund on her, which led me to cut them off after I rejected my mom's selfish demand. My sister, Allison, is 23 years old and just 12 minutes older than me, making her the so-called golden child in our family. From the very start, I was at a disadvantage because my parents originally planned to have only one child. They were not prepared for twins and felt overwhelmed when they discovered they were having two. Mom was afraid of any complications, so they decided that only Allison would receive the love and attention they had to offer. I learned about my parents' true feelings during my high school years from a drunken uncle at a Thanksgiving gathering. Hearing those words was a turning point for me. I realized that my efforts to win my parents' affection were futile. They made a choice to shower all their love on Allison, while I often felt ignored and undervalued. Growing up, the rivalry between Allison and me was intense. I pushed myself to excel and often tried to outperform her in everything. But instead of encouraging me, my parents seemed to resent my achievements, only fueling their favoritism toward her. Allison didn't actively seek to outshine me, rather, she thrived on receiving validation from others, including our parents. She would act as if my successes affected her deeply, and that manipulation led family members and even classmates to side with her, portraying me as the villain. I ended up with excellent grades and numerous accomplishments, while she garnered sympathy and attention for her perceived struggles. This dynamic left me feeling bitter, even though I wouldn't trade my accomplishments for anything. Fast forwarding to 2 years ago, we celebrated our 21st birthday. By then, both of us had graduated from college. I earned my degree from a top business school, was the valedictorian, and received a scholarship, which meant my education cost my parents less money. I expected them to be thrilled with my achievements, but they were more interested in Allison, who had barely passed her classes. Despite my internship at a firm, Allison was struggling to find a job, yet my parents focused their attention solely on her challenges and completely ignored my success. I tried to suppress my feelings because I was still living at home and hadn't saved up enough money to move out. After our birthday celebration, the reality hit hard. The day before our birthday, I found a note stating that my family had left for the beach with Allison and her friends. They didn't even tell me, leaving me home alone with just a $50 gift card for my birthday. That moment was the tipping point. I had endured many unfair situations throughout my childhood, but that was when I finally realized how deeply I had been sidelined. It was a heartbreaking moment that drove me to create distance between myself and my family, marking the end of any hope I had of being treated equally. That was the moment I realized I could no longer tolerate their behavior. The disappointment I felt was immense, and their lack of compassion cut deep. It pushed me to make a significant decision. I chose to move out that very day and leave everything behind without any intention of returning. Fortunately, I had a few close friends who welcomed me into their homes, offering a place to stay until I could find my own. I knew I wouldn't need long. My internship at the firm was promising, and they were likely to hire me once it was over. All I needed was a temporary living arrangement for a couple of months at most. Without informing my parents or sister, I packed up my belongings and relocated to a friend's apartment. I was determined to start fresh and put my family behind me. As I settled into this new chapter of my life, I realized that my absence didn't seem to bother them. They didn't reach out to me, nor did they express any longing for my return. They called on my birthday, just a day after I moved out, but instead of checking in on me or wishing me well, they simply stated that they would be returning soon and suggested I call a plumber for a broken tap. In that moment, I revealed that I had moved out and was no longer living at home, hoping to elicit some reaction. However, to my surprise, my parents appeared unfazed by the news, and my sister didn't seem to care either. That encounter marked the end of any meaningful communication I had with my family. Since then, I have not returned home or heard from them again. I did receive occasional updates about my sister Allison through friends, which kept me somewhat informed about her life. However, there was a clear disconnect. Neither my family knew anything about me, nor did I know much about them. Over the past 2 years, I worked diligently and achieved a significant milestone. I now have my own place. While it may not be extravagant, it's a lovely apartment situated in a nice neighborhood, and the rent is manageable given my income. Many of my peers have struggled to reach a similar point in their lives, so I take pride in how far I've come. I have made a conscious effort to keep thoughts of my family out of my mind. I was somewhat pleased to hear that Allison got married a few months ago to a businessman nearly a decade her senior and that she was enjoying life in California. I thought everything was fine within my family until 2 days ago when I unexpectedly received a call from my uncle. He informed me that I needed to visit my parents urgently because they had been involved in a serious car accident and wished to see me. Feeling a surge of concern, I hurried to the hospital, as I could not ignore their request. Upon my arrival, I learned that my parents had already been hospitalized for several days and were on the road to recovery from their injuries. A truck had collided with their vehicle, and while they survived, they sustained substantial injuries. I was shocked to discover that they did not have health insurance. My father had always held the misguided belief that if we took care of ourselves, we would never need to worry about hospital visits, a notion I found utterly ridiculous. Initially, my parents had reached out to my sister for assistance, but she informed them that she had no intention of returning home or helping them in any way. Apparently, she felt it would be inappropriate for our parents to ask for financial aid from her wealthy in-laws so soon after their wedding. She didn't want to give the impression that she was exploiting her husband's wealth. Moreover, she was not willing to abandon her new home and her two stepchildren, who were not her own biological kids, just to support her parents after their tragic accident. It was infuriating to think she prioritized a facade of family happiness over her own parents' welfare. Even if she wanted to assist them, she couldn't have, as her current financial status left her reliant on her husband. If he wasn't around, she wouldn't even afford a plane ticket to visit them. I was left to reflect on the turn of events, realizing that her position as the favorite daughter and the golden child had lost its shine. What upset me the most was that my parents had not even bothered to contact me first regarding their situation. The frustration escalated even further when my uncle informed me that my parents were now expecting me to cover their exorbitant medical bills. The amount was staggering and would be a significant burden for me to bear. Recovering from a financial loss of this magnitude will undoubtedly take a significant amount of time. The prospect of spending a great deal of money, particularly on individuals who have not shown me any care or affection throughout my life, is something I find deeply distressing. It is clear to me that these family members have other relatives who are able to assist them. Even if I choose not to help cover their expenses, it is likely someone else will step in to provide the necessary support. However, there is a part of me that believes it would be more embarrassing for them to accept financial help from others, especially since they would likely need to repay that money much sooner than they would if it came from me. During their request for funds, they assured me that I would receive my money back quickly, but I remain skeptical about that promise. At this moment, I find myself in a difficult situation. I have the option to either refuse to pay for my parents' medical bills, which could cause them humiliation, or I could pay the bills myself, risking my own financial stability and waiting for them to repay me. To be completely honest, I am not inclined to help them at all. My parents and I have not had any communication in the past 2 years, and the relationship has been strained for as long as I can remember. They feel like strangers to me now, which makes it hard for me to feel a strong desire to provide for them in their time of need. Choosing not to help my parents after their car accident fills me with mixed feelings. It is indeed a tough decision, but I have come to the realization that their medical expenses are likely to be taken care of, so there is no cause for them to worry. Their request for assistance seems to stem from their reluctance to ask other family members for help and perhaps a sense of pride that is preventing them from doing so. I have yet to inform them of my decision, as I struggle with the right words to communicate that I will not be contributing to their hospital bills after such a serious accident. It has been nearly 5 days since I last saw them, and after considering the opinions of others, I recognize that I have been unconsciously trying to compete with my sister, Allison. She chose not to help our parents, and I felt an urge to prove that I was the better daughter by offering my support. It is apparent that this competitive nature is deeply ingrained in me, and I may not easily shake it off. The comments I have read highlight that many people feel it was irresponsible for my parents not to have health insurance, and I agree. My father actively discouraged us from getting insurance, and had I been more involved in their lives, I would have insisted on its necessity. He even went without car insurance, believing in his exceptional driving skills. They were fortunate that the accident was the truck driver's fault, or else the financial burden of repairing the car would have added to their troubles. In terms of their financial situation, my parents are not in dire straits, but are not wealthy either. My father works as a sales head at his company, while my mother is employed in human resources at a smaller firm. Their combined income is sufficient for their needs, and since they are no longer financially responsible for me or Allison, they likely have a comfortable lifestyle. Growing up, we were never rich, but we were stable. We did not have to worry about money, yet we could not afford a lavish lifestyle either. This leads me to wonder why my parents would be unable to cover their own bills if they are willing to borrow money and assure me that they will pay it back soon. They haven't provided me with a clear reason for their current financial predicament, and I doubt I will learn more about it in the future. After much contemplation, I finally told my parents that I would not be helping with their medical expenses. They had been calling me frequently for the past week, and I eventually realized that ignoring their calls was not a viable option. I answered their calls and explained that I had thought about their request carefully, and it was my decision not to provide financial support. I didn't think I had any obligation to help my parents, but I was not prepared for how they would react. When I told them I couldn't support them, they took it very badly. My mom was furious. Despite having broken ribs, she yelled at me as loudly as she could. She accused me of being ungrateful, hurling the usual insults that I had come to expect from her. Meanwhile, my dad chimed in with his harsh words, declaring that I was no longer his daughter before abruptly ending the call. Surprisingly, their words didn't hurt as much as I had anticipated. In reality, I hadn't truly felt like their daughter for quite some time. I could hardly recall the last time I felt any love from my parents, especially since they had intentionally not spoken to me or checked in on me for 2 years. Their silence began after they ignored me on a significant birthday, and I chose to move out. I realized I had been living without a genuine family connection for a while. Now, I was determined to continue my life as I had for the past 2 years, which meant living independently, just as I had before. This latest fallout with my parents didn't really change anything for me, even though they thought it would. Unfortunately, not long after my tense phone call with my parents, my uncle reached out to me to deliver his own version of a lecture. He wanted to give me a piece of his mind, but after just a few moments of listening to him, I decided to hang up. I didn't need negativity from him as well. I knew that my family could think whatever they wanted about me, but their opinions held no weight in my life anymore. Later, my uncle sent me a text to share some news that he thought might upset me. He informed me that my parents had another family lined up to borrow money from and that they had ultimately decided to use the funds they had set aside for my wedding. I learned that they had already wasted more than half of that money on my sister Allison's wedding, and whatever was left had been spent on a trip to Europe. This left them with almost no savings, which was why they found themselves in a financial bind. I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It became clear that my parents' financial troubles were a result of their own poor choices, and I was grateful that I had not wasted my hard-earned money on their bills. Their lack of insurance was a consequence of their own misguided beliefs, and that was not my responsibility. Now, they faced the consequences of their actions, and if they needed money, they could reach out to other relatives. I had made it clear to myself that I would not be giving them anything. They had no claim to my time, my energy, or my hard-earned money. In addition to everything else, something unusual happened today that I felt the need to express. I haven't shared any of my family situation with my friends because most of them don't know me well yet, and I wasn't ready to reveal my family history. So, I turned to Reddit to let it out. It has been almost 2 weeks since I last spoke to my parents. Earlier today, I was taken by surprise when Allison showed up at my apartment. I didn't expect her to know where I lived, but apparently, one of our old high school friends informed her of my neighborhood. I found it surprising that she went through the effort to track me down. When I opened the door, I noticed how different she looked and acted. Allison seemed more refined and sophisticated than I remembered. In the past, she had always spoken in a way that reminded me of our high school days, but now her manner of speaking had transformed. She came across as more mature and composed. Her clothing choices, her jewelry, and even her makeup were different. It felt almost as if I were talking to a different person entirely. Despite her new appearance, I realized that some things about Allison had not changed. No matter how much she tried to present herself in a different light, the core of who she was remained the same. You can't disguise a person's true nature with makeup or a new look. I decided to let her in, curious about why she had come to visit me, despite the changes in her appearance and demeanor. Curiosity prompted me to speak with her after exchanging some pleasantries about her life. She began to share, without me asking, the details of what she had been doing recently. It became clear that she felt the need to brag about her seemingly perfect life as a stay-at-home mom, raising 2 toddlers and married to a wealthy man. Her focus seemed to be on the fact that she didn't have to worry about anything significant, claiming that her only concern was her cuticles. As she continued, I found myself waiting for her to get to the main point of her visit, all while politely nodding along to what felt like a long-winded and rather dull monologue about the overlooked value of being a traditional housewife. She even suggested that I should consider doing the same, which made me eager for her to wrap up this irrelevant chatter. After about 15 minutes of her recounting her life, she finally got to the point. She explained that she had come back to see our parents, who had been asking her to visit them since their recent accident. They weren't interested in her wealth, they simply wanted her presence during this challenging time. After 2 weeks, she decided it was time to visit them and thought she should also reconnect with me, hoping we could resolve our previous issues. Everything seemed satisfactory at that moment, but then she shifted gears and began complaining about how needy our parents had been. She described them as disrespectful to her new family and spent considerable time expressing her frustrations, saying she had to leave her 2 young children with a nanny in order to be with them. She expressed resentment toward our parents for making her choose between her family and her kids, which left me puzzled. I couldn't understand why she insisted on referring to her children as hers when they were not biologically related to her. As she continued, she shared a lot about her marriage and her husband, even though I hadn't asked for those details. From what I gathered, it seemed like she had married someone who was primarily interested in his custody rights concerning his own children. Despite what she believed, it appeared to me that her husband may not have been genuinely in love with her. He had been in a custody battle for quite a while, but when he announced his engagement to Allison, it seemed like a strategic move to strengthen his case for custody, which he obtained. Allison went on about how she had saved his children, but all I could think was how she might have been used in the process. Their whirlwind romance, which lasted less than a year before marriage, raised red flags for me. It was hard to believe that true love could blossom so rapidly, especially following a divorce. As she spoke, it became evident that she might be fully aware of her husband's motivations yet chose to ignore them for the sake of financial comfort. It seemed she was content being a glorified nanny to children who, quite frankly, were doing just fine with their nanny's care. On top of it all, she expressed anger towards our own parents for wanting her support after their serious accident. To her, it felt like their neediness was intruding on her time with her new family, which included a husband who likely didn't love her and 2 kids who weren't hers in any real sense. If the term ungrateful had a face, it would surely match Allison's. While I have my own issues with our parents, listening to her complaints about their supposed neediness made me question why they had chosen to favor her over me all these years. Then, she finally got to the crux of her visit. She informed me that she would be leaving in just 2 days. Although she had promised our parents she would stay for at least a month, she claimed she found herself quickly bored with their endless recounting of their traumatic experience. She mentioned needing to return home soon, and it became clear that her focus was entirely on her own discomfort. Now, she was looking to me to step in and reconcile with our parents in her absence, as she didn't want to feel guilty for abandoning them in their time of need. Unbeknownst to her, I had already been cut off by our parents yet again because I had refused to assist them with their requests. I made the decision not to help them with their bills. This choice likely stemmed from the fact that they never mentioned me or even consider my feelings. Because of this, they didn't bring this issue up with Allison. She was here, not out of genuine concern for me, but rather seeking sympathy for herself. She had to deal with our parents and had chosen to abandon her own family. Now, she wanted to use the sympathy she gained from her struggles to manipulate me into stepping into her place. She wanted me to provide emotional support for our parents because she felt too overwhelmed to do it herself. This behavior was classic Allison manipulation, and I recognized it immediately. I was not going to fall for her tactics. While Allison was at my house, I had no intention of confronting her about this manipulation. I knew that doing so would only lead to an argument, something I wanted to avoid. Instead, I told her I would try to help, fully aware that I had no intention of actually doing so. After our conversation, she left, reminding me to keep in touch. However, we both understood that she did not truly mean that. I was relieved to see her go. Not only is she a self-centered and narcissistic individual, but she is also incredibly dull to talk to. During our time together, I could hardly get a word in edgewise as she rambled on about her uneventful life in California. Her existence seemed to revolve entirely around parties, her stepchildren, and her husband. She believes she is living the dream, but I find it quite pitiful. It is clear that her husband does not love her, he seems distant and uninterested, while her kids spend a significant amount of time with their biological mother. Because of this, I think they are growing closer to her, which only reinforces the idea that they will always prefer their mom over Allison. I imagine that this reality hurts, but it's the life she chose. I have decided to create a different life for myself, one that is far removed from my family. They do not deserve even a fraction of my attention or compassion. Today's experience has confirmed my belief that distancing myself from my parents and my sister was the right choice. I want nothing to do with these selfish and cruel people who seem incapable of thinking about anyone but themselves, especially Allison. I feel a sense of shame for being related to such individuals. The positive side is that I have finally cut ties with all of them for good. I do not expect them to reach out to me anytime soon. As soon as Allison left, I blocked her from my life. I had already blocked my parents and other relatives a couple of days ago, so I feel secure against any further family disturbances, at least for now. I genuinely hope they do not attempt to contact me again, as I know I am much better off without them in my life.